So yeah, I think de-escalating the whole thing and it really takes the 1 Corinthians 13 kind of love to stick with people. I've had people walk away. And so if you love somebody with this much trauma, the best thing you can do for them besides take them to the throne of God is stay. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Wednesdays with Watson. It is Wednesday, and if you have been following the podcast, you know that I am Amy Watson and I am your host, and we record these episodes every Wednesday, so you may be listening to it on a different day, but either way, thank you. I am so appreciative of the time that you have decided to invest. I've been so excited about the podcast in general and some of the communication that I'm getting with people via email and social media. And if you hang on to the end of the podcast, you'll see all of the ways that you can get in contact with me. I am super excited about today. In this first season, our podcast, PTSD, Jesus and Me, where Jesus is the star of my story, as well as trauma-informed counseling, as well as my community. And speaking of community, one of the reasons why I'm so excited today, and this name will not be at all unfamiliar to those of you who have been listening to the podcast, but I am so excited to welcome our very first guest on Wednesdays with Watson, my friend, my sister, my business partner, Crissy. Hey, Crissy, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to welcome you to the podcast. And so I just wanted first, before I started into a little bit of the teacher mode, and then we're going to have a conversation about why you're on the podcast today. We've called this Memory Keeper because, as I will talk about in some of the science of PTSD, memories are often different than as they actually occurred. And so the Lord had placed you in an opportunity to be a memory keeper for me in so many ways. But I wanted to start out because you are an Old Testament fan, am I right?
I am.
You know, that's always confused me about you.
I love the Old Testament.
I always used to say, but Jesus isn't in the Old Testament, but he kind of is.
He is. It just looks different.
Yeah.
It's the promise of him coming.
But early in those days, and some of the stories that these guys have already heard, you shared a special psalm with me. And I just want you to tell us before we start into some of the science of this, and then after the science, the really cool part of conversation that we already recorded about how you're my memory keeper, and I'm so grateful for that. Tell me what psalm that was.
So we were in the same Sunday morning class, and I got the opportunity. I say opportunity, but really I was scared.
You were terrified.
I was terrified.
I was sitting next to you. I remember that.
I got the opportunity to teach one morning, and it was a summer in Psalms. And I taught on Psalm 91, and it's always been a favorite of mine. Really, it hit home for me when I was 24, and I went on a Young Life wilderness hiking trip, and it was a week long, and you're completely out of touch with all of humanity, but certainly can't get word out if you're in trouble.
Right.
And the entire week, I was extremely ill. And we were climbing mountains, hiking 30 miles. It was very intense, and it was gorgeous, and I was sick. But there was no way for my mom to know that. But the whole time I was there, she was praying Psalm 91 over me, and especially verses 5 and 6. You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or the arrow that flies by day, of the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, or of the destruction that lays waste at noon. And it was a battle, day, night, noon, it didn't matter. I was battling. And so often I feel like these verses are appropriate for PTSD.
Yeah.
It's different battles. It's the terror by night. It's an arrow that flies by day. And so it's been appropriate my whole life. And even more so now.
Well, by the way, I didn't know the answer to that question, and the fact that your mom prayed that over you, I might not have even remembered that, and that's precious for its own reasons. But yeah, I've dubbed it the PTSD prayer because those verses that you just read really describes the day from morning to night of a post-traumatic stress disorder patient. And So thank you for introducing me to that psalm. I'm going to start really quickly, and some of these things, Crissy, you'll recognize. I know sometimes you'll text me and go, "What was that again?" That because we both learned this initially from Dr. Pettit, and then of course I've done my research. But we're going to be talking hippocampuses and amygdalas here for just a few minutes before you jump back on with me. And the reason why I want to do that is because the reason why on this first podcast you're here is to help me unjumble some memories. And so in order for our listeners to understand why that matters is, why do you need to help me unjumble those memories? And so here I go into teacher mode, and then I can't wait to continue our conversation. You guys know that I love playing both the role of storyteller, and also the goal of this podcast is to educate you about post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The only difference really in those two diagnoses being that complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a result of repeated trauma over a long period of time, which is what I have, but the symptoms are the same. And so before I bring Crissy on, and I've got a very special reason for doing that today, one of the goals of this podcast is to talk about and share with and bring on people who have been instrumental in my healing story. And that is what this is. This is a healing story. Sometimes it's hard to listen to, but I always encourage people, you hear my voice, you can go to my website, you can see my smile, you know that I am good. Doesn't mean life is always easy, but that I am on the other side of my journey with post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least given it a nice gut punch, a nice body blow. As I always mention, there are 3 components, and because I'm a writer, I love an alliteration, hence the Wednesdays with Watson, and then also the 3 C's that are central to anything that I am trying to do here. And that is my church, my community, and also trauma-informed counseling. So as we've talked about post-traumatic stress disorder over the last several weeks, we have talked about different hallmarks of post-traumatic stress disorder, the last one being flashbacks, but disassociation, detachment. We talked about all of those things, and no doubt if you are a patient of post-traumatic stress disorder, whether you've been diagnosed or not, you recognize some of those things. If you love somebody with PTSD, you recognize some of the things that we've talked about. Today I want to talk about something that is super interesting and super fascinating, and something that Crissy brought up to me as she was listening to the podcast over the last few weeks. But before I begin that story, and before I bring her on to tell her part of the story, I want to be your teacher for just a second. As a kid who raced home to watch Emergency every day after school and every medical drama and everything, I always wanted to be a doctor. Took every class to be a doctor, have an undergrad degree to be a doctor, but then sick people make me sad, and so I am not a doctor. However, I love the study of these things, and so I want to help you understand two really important things that happen in trauma patients, and even some understanding as to why sometimes the same traumatic event can affect a person and manifest itself in post-traumatic stress disorder, and then some people can look at that exact same event and not be affected by post-traumatic stress disorder. This is also my opportunity to weekly remind you to remember not to compare your pain. Don't compare it with mine. Don't compare it with your sisters. Don't compare it with your cousins. Your pain is yours. The grace that God has for you is for your pain and your pain alone, and mine alone. So please do not compare. There's 2 components to our brain that is associated with memory and that trauma affects. And those 2 organs are buried deeply in 2 different parts of the brain, so deeply, in fact, that one of them is difficult to get to. As a matter of fact, if you had a tumor on this, the doctors would say to you, it's better off of not digging in the middle of your brain to address this issue. There are 2 parts of the brain. One is the hippocampus, and one is the amygdala. Now, the hippocampus, its physical location is very, very difficult to get to, as I mentioned, but it has a bunch of jobs in life. But as it pertains to trauma, the hippocampus is actually the physical location where memories are stored. And so we will witness something, or we will see something, say, like one of my favorite memories of all time as a Jaguars fan is the first time we went to the playoffs. And Morton Anderson, who played for the Atlanta Falcons at the time, Mr. Automatic. And all he had to do was hit this chip shot, like this 22-yard chip shot field goal, and the Jaguars would have lost. But if he missed it, we were going to go to the playoffs in just our second season. And I will never forget where I was when I watched Morton Anderson, who is now in the Hall of Fame, miss that field goal. My hippocampus took that really pleasurable memory, and basically the hippocampus's job, one of its jobs in life, is to direct memories where to go. And that is one of my strongest memories. So the hippocampus then directed it to the amygdala. And the amygdala is the real warrior in the fight against post-traumatic stress disorder. Because what the amygdala does is it took that memory and it decided whether it had interpreted it. So it interpreted it and manifested itself physically in a very positive, a very happy memory. So the amygdala is the real warrior. Now, we know that trauma affects both of these organs by shrinking them, thereby decreasing their efficacy to at first bring in the memory and then interpret the memory. And so you'll see a lot of post-traumatic stress patients interpret a memory as traumatic that isn't traumatic at all, because the actual size of that organ has shrunk as a result of trauma. Or recent studies have shown some people are just born with smaller amygdalas and hippocampuses, which may explain why some people are affected by trauma and some are not. Now, I bring all of this up to you because both of these are really important in how we lay down memories and how we interpret those memories and how we can report those memories back at a later date. Trauma, without a doubt, absolutely affects both of these organs. This is where the fight or flight comes in and some of the neuroplasticity stuff that we'll talk about when we bring Dr. Pettit on. But essentially, the reason why I explained those two things to you and those two organs to you is because they do affect the way we lay down memories. And it is the reason why a lot of times a trauma victim, say for example, will get on the stand in a court of law, and they will literally not be able to remember parts of it, and the person will get off because they thought that they'll say the offender, the person that attacked him, had a red shirt on with blue jeans, and maybe he had white shorts and a t-shirt. But because of the way the trauma affected the amygdala and the hippocampus, things get left out, things get misplaced, things get jumbled. And so this is where I bring Chris in, because emotional memory processing is by these two organs that when they are shrunk, when they are not the size that they need to be, whether we're born that way or trauma has made it that way, it absolutely makes memories weird. And so as Crissy, who is one of my beta listeners, has listened to the podcast over the last couple weeks, every single one of them, she came to me and said, hey, this is how I remember it. And over the course of several weeks, we realized that I am, in fact, exhibiting exactly what I'm explaining to you, where both of these organs in my brain, as a result of repeated trauma over 35 years, have been affected. And so Crissy is my business partner. She is my sister. She is my friend. She is a bunch of stuff to me, likely. And as you've heard on the other podcasts, she was instrumental in so many things. And so welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you doing this. Everybody who knows me knows how much I love you and how much I appreciate you and how much the Lord really has used you in my life. And I referred to you last week. I'm not sure which one is Jonathan and David. No, actually, I know which is which. You are Jonathan because you continue to give me your battle gear. And you did during those times. And so I want to bring you in on this for this podcast for sure, and probably the next one, because we want your perspective. Many people have emailed me or texted me or interacted with me on social media, and they said, you're helping me understand somebody I live with post-traumatic stress disorder. And right now, Chris, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of racial tensions. And so there's no doubt that PTSD is going to be on the rise. You don't have to have a story like mine to have PTSD. Right now, you just need to turn on the news. And so the mission more than ever is to bring people on also who love patients of post-traumatic stress disorder, who will walk with them, because it, like any other mental illness, is very difficult for everyone. most often the person who is not medicated, who has not been through the trauma, it is hard for everyone. And so as I was praying about this podcast and bringing you on, I remembered a movie that you introduced me to that happens to be one of your favorite movies. And that movie is The Prince of Tides.
I've always loved The Prince of Tides, which, if you know me, it's not my typical watch. I like fluffy. I really enjoy a movie that has a happy ending. But there's something so powerful about that story, and it has always stuck with me. And there are a couple of things that are said in there that are very true and applicable in this situation. One of them is, at one point, the lead character says, the silence is worse than the event that happened to him, the trauma that happened. And I think that's why this podcast is so important. We need to talk about it. God meant us to live in community. Forcing a trauma victim to be silent is worse than what has actually happened to them. So the first thing I would say is listen. And the second thing that has always stuck with me from that movie is Barbara Streisand's character says, you were her memory even then. And this is her as a child, and her brother was her memory, because once she had been traumatized, her memories were jumbled at best. And so forever he had been a memory keeper for her. And from the very beginning, as things unfolded with you, Amy, that movie and that line had always stuck with me. And I took it to heart, like the Lord had said, that this is going to be your role. You will be a memory keeper. You will be her memory, and you can be helpful in that way. I didn't understand the science of it, but I knew that there was a hiccup, because I know you, right, and you're very smart, but the lapses in memory did not make sense with the person I knew. And so I have become your memory keeper.
Even today with little things, so we'll go back to this for in a minute, but you were a significant memory keeper, better than a journal, probably better than things I actually wrote, right? Because I was writing things that I remember. But what is so powerful to me about that quote in The Prince of Tides, and we're not telling you what the event is because it's a great movie and you should go watch it, and we don't want to be a spoiler. But the silence is worse than the actual event. And one of the things is that you, along with other people, refused to let me be silent. And so as I told that story about living with you, I remember the first time I came into your house and I put the key in the door, and how weird that was, because I had come from being married for 12 years and then living in what I dubbed as the ghetto to your house. And I just remember how weird that was, but you really refused to be silent on the issue. And I've always appreciated that. You have an incredible sense of justice, but I've always appreciated that. Now, you and I have a really funny thing going on, and it's actually taken on a new life, even with our counselor, with me being a wordsmith and you having a word budget. But we came up with a really word that worked for both of us, and it basically is a ceasefire a lot of times for us, and we call it trauma brain. Tell them what we mean by trauma brain.
If they escalate unusually, like if you're getting in an argument and suddenly someone's ready to drop a nuclear bomb.
Or push a fire extinguisher off the wall.
Correct. Or throw coffee against a wall.
Oh, right.
Right. Then what I try to do, knowing that whatever is firing in your brain, or could be in mine, is off. Right. It's off. It's firing on a million cylinders instead of one.
Right.
Then I try to bring my voice down, and I think we both have decided, okay, hey, trauma brain, and say it laughingly. If that doesn't work, then I say it soothingly. We try different ways of getting through all those firing cylinders that are saying, I can't handle it. Throw all the nuclear bombs, throw all the bombs. I can't deal. Whatever can get through. So if it's calm, if I can say, hey, I think this might be trauma brain, or if we need to say, hey,
This is trauma
this is
brain.
trauma brain. Either way, whatever way we need to, the key is to hear the person and not the argument.
Mm,
And
that's huge.
you really do need to be paying attention to when, especially someone who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is picking a fight and by picking a fight, I do mean that this is not intentional. It is a defense mechanism because their brain is literally thinking, I could die.
I got to survive.
I've got to survive.
Yeah.
This is fight or flight.
Right.
And so it is literally, we could fight over the color of the floor.
100%. And we have.
Yes. And screaming. And so you've got to back yourself out of the situation and recognize that there is something else at play. And we're at the point now where I can say, okay, something else is bothering you. And oftentimes you're getting to the point now where you can say, I don't know what it is.
Right. And that's half the
And
battle.
that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
One of my favorite things that you say, and I would as Crissy is speaking to people who love survivors of post-traumatic stress disorder and people living with post-traumatic stress disorder, there's a couple things. One of the things that you say to me all the time, and it is absolute, like somebody just gave me a shot of a tranquilizer because it calms me down. Because one of the issues with the amygdala and the hippocampus is everything. I don't have the ability to de-escalate stress, right? So we just came off of, we're in the middle of a pandemic or towards the end of a pandemic. But what a lot of people don't know is that, as I mentioned early in the podcast, you're my business partner and we've been in business for 10 years together. And when that happened, my brain shut down, 100% shut down. And so it's a trigger. And so you live, unfortunately, with triggers. And I often apologize to you. I'm sorry, or I'll say something like, this is my broken brain. When you hand me your phone and go in the car and go, do I turn right or left or north or south? You know better because those things don't happen. But one of the things that you always say to me that just brings me to a place of safety and not feeling like I'm backed in a corner and not feeling like I have to defend myself is you will say, you're not okay. You just use those words. You're not okay. And first, that really made me mad. Early on, that really made me mad because, of course, I was okay. I've been okay all these years. I'm successful. I get up in the morning. I got up in the morning, even though I was doing some things that weren't great. That offended me at first, but now it's such a loving thing to say to me is, you're not okay. Why not? And you're really good about helping me back up and walk back. Like, this trigger happened. And it's not like the trigger triggers then. Many times a trigger can trigger 3 or 4 days and down the road. And so yeah, I think de-escalating the whole thing and it really takes the 1 Corinthians 13 kind of love to stick with people. I've had people walk away. And so if you love somebody with this much trauma, the best thing you can do for them besides take them to the throne of God is stay. And to Crissy's point about that quote in that movie that she loved so well, don't be silent. And so you refuse to let me perform my way out of a trigger. You refuse to do all of that.
One of the things that is really important to ask is, tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And often you may not know what's going on. Even if I can say, hey, I don't think that actually the color of the floor is what's bothering you. Can you tell me what's going on? Tell me about your morning. Mm-hmm. And so even going back into the morning, then suddenly something starts to trigger. It starts to unlayer itself. Well, this morning I got that phone call, but that bothered me because yesterday I got that email. And then suddenly we unpackage and suddenly, well, what's really bothering me is X.
Right.
So tell me what's going on is a very simple phrase, but it seems to work 99% of the time. Tell me what's going on.
Because what I hear is I love you and I care.
Yeah.
And early on,
I want to hear you.
right. I don't want you to be silent.
Yeah.
Right? Because the silent is worse than what you went through.
Right.
And there were so many times that we actually had knockdown, drag-out arguments because I will never forget a precious memory. And it must have been around Valentine's Day. And this was when I first moved in with you, and I'm air quoting again for 3 months. But we had those little candy hearts that you like so well. Yep. And you just would not leave it alone, like you would not let me not talk about it. And we were throwing those candy hearts back and forth to the room and catching them and making it funny. But I can't stress enough, and Crissy's one of many people who do this, but because I've done life with her so closely for so long, and again, we're business partners, and we're getting ready to talk about how we met and how I gained a family at 35 years old. Right. And so, but I wanted to have that part of the conversation, and then really that's not scripted, that's organic. But I think that quote from that movie has really framed you. I think that the Lord also really builds some people different. Well, he builds us all differently, but you have an incredible sense of justice. And so some of the funny parts of my story will be when we went to court, actually, and we were all afraid that we were going to get you out of jail. So we know that memories with complex post-traumatic stress disorder as well as PTSD are affected, right? We know that. So one of the things that you said to me in a loving voice, and not that your first podcast sucked, Amy, was, I remember how we met a little bit differently than you do, Amy.
Yes.
And so for those of you who have been listening to all the podcasts, you know my version of how we met. And for those of you who are picking this one up for the first time, you'll hear it in reverse. But this is a very specific example of how my brain and those memories get blogged up. And so we're going to talk about 2 of them today. And this one being the first one. So you tell us the story. Now, before I do this, let me just say that for those of you who met Crissy, know that you will really be hard-pressed to find a more shy person on the planet. You will be hard-pressed to find a person, she probably could go days without uttering a single word from her voice box. And I, however, am the exact opposite of that. I'm an extreme extrovert, number 8 on the Enneagram. I can't remember what you are, but sure. Quiet is what you are, and shy and introverted. And so I say that because what's coming next, and hopefully I don't remember it all wrong, what's coming next is nothing short of a miracle because you are so shy. So tell the people your version of this beautiful Jonathan and David friendship.
Well, we both ended up at the same Bible study.
That part is true.
That part is true.
Okay.
However, Amy remembers that we met at that time and we did not meet at all. We were in the same Bible study, but it was large enough that we never actually met. I did not know her name. I just saw her. And then the school year started. She started teaching. I started coaching, and all of my students, players, kept saying, we have this new teacher. She's awesome. She's so cool. Did not know a name. I started going to Sunday school, and this person was in there, still no name and no name attached to the new science teacher, which is what the students called her instead of her name. There's just the new science teacher. She's so cool. It's new science teacher. So the very first time I talked to Amy was after she led our group that day. And I went up to her and had to wait 185 minutes for everyone else to talk to her. And I sat there quietly and then went up and said, thank you so much for sharing. It meant so much, blah, blah, blah. That's the first time. And then I said, I think that you teach and I coach, and I think we have some of the same students. At which point we began to talk Sunday mornings a little bit about our students or go to a basketball game together or whatever. The memory that you have where we really clicked was not until that December, and that part of the memory is correct. That part is true. Yes. Okay. But by that point, we had actually been friends for a while.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. But that memory stuck, and it was a pivotal moment because we talked about football and about Maine, and you had just gotten out of the hospital,
And let's talk about that just for a second. That was not the psych ward, that the story that people have heard. I was having some heart issues. Yeah.
And so I knew there are some things that I'm good at, even in my shyness, and that is that I can dive in. And so when it's a deeper topic, I knew that I had some things I could talk to you about. And so after that, you said, let's go to lunch. Once we had lunch, it was game on. We became friends. And so that would have been December, January. And from then on, from January through May, was our epic California road trip.
Awesome.
Which was so awesome.
Chris drove the PCH highway and I didn't die.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so beautiful. So in those 5 or 6 months is when we really, really bonded. And it was that at that time that I said, I did call my mom and I did say, hey, I'm thinking about asking Amy to come move in with me. And she said, great, make it a set amount of time, 3 months, for her sake as well as your own, so that you don't hurt your friendship. And so I did. I invited you to move in for 3 months, fully knowing that it was not going to be just 3 months.
I kind of remember it was a passive ask, though.
It was. That part is an absolutely correct memory. It was hey, I was just thinking, maybe just for the summer, you know, just for a couple of months, it would just kind of get you on your feet again. Why don't you come move in with me?
So it wasn't, I did think we met that night at the Bible study, but clearly we met a little bit later. And I remember a little bit about hearing about the cool volleyball coach and the JV, and I had some of those kids. And so it was really quite miraculous of how we came together. And your favorite subject on the face of this planet, which makes me honored to be your friend, and it makes me honored that you wanted to be my friend that day, is your depth in Jesus. That's one of our C's is there's no way that I would be here. There's no way you would have been equipped without Jesus. And so I really am so grateful to the Lord for, the opportunity to teach into that Bible study. That really is kind of what hooked you. You're like, I want to be her friend.
Yes,
because she loves my Jesus.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
100%.
So, and yeah, we were 100% inseparable. And I was just remembering probably what maybe you experienced as the first quote, air quote, trigger for me is when we went to San Francisco. I already had a camera and you bought a camera, but I bought a really expensive lens.
Yes.
Because of the time change and all that stuff, I was kind of out of it. Anyway, make a long story short, we went to a restaurant after that and I broke the lens. And it was a disproportionate response to breaking the lens, to say the very least. Do you have any memory of that? Because I think it speaks to some of this hypervigilance when things like that come up in response to stress.
Yes, it was. I mean, honestly, it was such an overwhelming, almost a fear. And I think that it was so close to the domestic violence.
Okay.
That would have been, I think that I knew at that moment that I needed to do whatever it was to help solve it for you. So the first thing was, we'll go buy a new one. It's no big deal. It's not a problem. It's no big deal. We'll just buy a new one. But as we looked at it, we realized that the only thing that had broken actually was just the UV protector on it.
Right.
And it turned out that it was not broken, and that was a gift. But in that moment, the only thing I could do is take it out of your hands. You're okay. I'm okay. We can get another one. It'll be all right. Anything to sort of to break through the moment. And
neither of us had a clue what PTSD even was at that point. And you barely knew me.
I knew you had suffered. It didn't take a diagnosis for me to understand that you had had a lot of hardship. And so I knew that the best thing I could do for you was help you understand that this is not the end of the world. This is a lens. We can get a new lens, or we can cry over this one, but it's okay. You're not in trouble. And I think that was the key, is no one's angry.
Yeah.
No one's upset with you. Yeah. You didn't do anything stupid. You're not an idiot. And those were the things that I was trying to break through, is I felt like you were A, afraid, and B, thought, I'm so dumb.
Yes. Yeah, I was so mad at myself because that lens was so expensive. And yeah, I think looking back on it now, yeah, the response from my ex-husband would not have been good,
Clearly.
And
Clearly.
so I think that was maybe one of the first times but what I've always wondered, and this really, I've asked you this question over the years in so many different forms, and I don't know that you can articulate it because there's some things that the Lord just does and we say, okay, Some of the people listening to this and some people that we both know and love who are mutual friends of ours, if at all you could articulate, why me? Why did you choose me? In the 13 years that I've known Crissy, I've never asked her that question. Her response to me didn't really surprise me, but her response to me deserves more time than we would have in the podcast, as I want to be respectful of your time. The verse that I referenced in my conversation with Crissy is John chapter 15, verse 13, although I'm sure it's found in the other three Gospels, where the Bible says, "Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his friend." And of course, we know that ultimately Jesus laid down his life for us, friend of sinners. And so sometimes when we read that verse, we think of literal laying down our lives for our friends. And certainly that is definitely a friend, without question. I think we all would agree with that. But laying one's life down oftentimes means carrying those person's burdens along with them. And I feel the importance to mention this to you because what Crissy did for me in the parts of the story that you've already heard and parts of the story that you haven't heard is a little akin to if you were on a hike with a friend and you both have backpacks and your job is, the goal is to pick up unique rocks and you're hiking up the mountain. And one friend sees that the other friend is struggling and so they start to put their rocks in their backpack just for a little while. And that is really a snapshot of living out, laying down your life for a friend. During a time when I still needed to hike, I still needed to live, Crissy was the person that God called to take my rocks and put them in her backpack just for a little while. I do think it's important to note that it is super risky, for lack of a better word, in situations like this because we have an enemy who does not want healing to occur and certainly doesn't want us helping each other heal. And so it's really important in close friendships like this that you guard against the enemy. You guard against leaning on each other too much, making sure that Jesus is still the star of your story, making sure that you are pointing each other to Jesus. And so while Crissy very practically came alongside and continues to even to this day, she is not more important than the star of the story. She happens to be a player that the director, the great producer, Jesus, has decided to put into my life. But it is super important and something that we make sure that we do just in the way of taking care of our friendship is making sure that we're staying on the right side of that. I think in situations with PTSD, and particularly with stories like mine, there can be a tendency, and I hate to use that word because I don't feel like that's true here, but there can be some opportunity for codependency to enter in on either side. So it is really important for those of you under the sound of my voice who are walking along with someone with PTSD, or even if you are the patient, that you remember that that person is put into your life to be a player, but not to be the star. And it's really important that you guard against some of the things that the enemy wants to bring into the story, thereby really destroying all the good that has been done. Crissy will be with us for 2 more podcasts. We thought that it would only be 1 and then 2, and it turned into 3. And the Lord really just continues to be in the place of telling this story and helping people with PTSD. As always, please hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform streaming service. If you are so inclined, leave us a review. Those are always helpful. Throw us a couple stars if you're so inclined. All of those things help us come up when someone is researching this topic, particularly if they're researching a Christian worldview on the topic of post-traumatic stress disorder. I continue to get communication from listeners, and you can do that in a few ways. Facebook and Twitter is Amy Watson Author, and Instagram is Author Amy Watson. You can also email me at amywatsonauthor.com. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and we will spend more time together in 2 weeks.